Good morning and welcome to the April 26, 2018 Zoning Board of Adjustment meeting. If any member of the audience wishes to speak to an item on the agenda, there are speaker request forms to the left of the dais. Please fill out the request with the agenda number of the item you wish to speak to and hand it to the secretary. At this time, we would also like to ask that if any member of the audience has a cell phone or other electronic device, that you either turn it off or turn the ringer to silent. If you need to take a call, please step out to the hallway so the meeting is not disrupted. The public hearing on item number 1 is now opened. Approval of the March 22nd Zoning Board of Adjustment meeting minutes. Karen made the motion to approve.
Second.
And Galen seconded that motion. Any discussion? All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Item number 2.
Item number 2 is 18 VA 004, a variance request to reduce the minimum required front yard setback from 25 feet to 0 feet. Property is located at 414 Omaha Street, Racine Street on the right, and Waterloo on the west side. Property zone general commercial district. Here we have an aerial view of the property showing the existing structures. We're looking at reducing the front yard setback for that existing structure on the east side of the property. The applicant has previously submitted a preliminary subdivision plan which required the dedication of additional right-of-way along Racine Street, and there's a covenant agreement which will be signed as part of this, that since they if they're not required to dedicate that right-of-way, when the city requires the right-of-way, they will dedicate it. And the reduction in front yard setback is to that future property line in the future. Future land use shows mixed-use commercial and a revitalization corridor, and East Omaha Street is a principal arterial street. Here we have property lines shown, and then future lot being split off on the west side, and in this area is where a future lot line would go. And this graphic shows it better. If additional right-of-way is needed, this portion of the building would be removed at the time that right-of-way is dedicated, leaving the majority of the structure with a 0-foot setback. And you'll notice in the staff report that, or the project report, that it's been updated with some language stating that staff recommends to approve, but in the event that the existing structure is ever removed in its entirety, or the existing structure is damaged beyond 50% of the value, a minimum 25-foot front yard setback must be provided. So it would be for the existing structure today. Here we have looking west on Omaha, to the east, directly across the street. This is looking at the side of the building, which is built along that property line. And then to the north, at current project going on, I believe that's Wellspring or Wellfully. And then this is looking to the north of Racine Street as it ends, and then property to the east. So with that, staff's recommending approval of the variance request with the stipulation that, with the added stipulation that in the event the existing structure is ever removed in its entirety or damaged beyond 50% of its value, that a 25-foot front yard setback be provided. Are there any questions for staff?
I don't have any lights up. Kurt?
So if they do have to dedicate the right-of-way, then they're just going to take out that part of the building,
Yes.
not more to achieve the 25-foot setback. So they would have a 0 setback again once they tear down the part that's dedicated, correct?
Correct.
Okay. So what do you mean then with when you said that if there's anything done to it, you would they would provide a 25-foot setback. Is
That
that
would
just if
be-
they tear down the whole building?
Yes.
Okay.
Or if it was damaged in a fire beyond 50% of its value.
All right, I was just a little confused on that, so thank you.
I don't have any other speaker requests up. I look for a motion then if everybody's clear on this one. Oh, John?
Who owns the property to the east?
It's the Mahler's partnership still, I believe.
Is it? Why wouldn't you just replat the road? It's only a half a block long. Move it to the east.
Sure, could you put up the aerial?
Yeah.
So as we look at this, we have reviewed plats for both the properties to the east and the west. And the property owner to the east is willing to dedicate additional right-of-way, and in fact has as a part of their proposed development plans. And as you know, whenever we have existing rights-of-way, and we need more because it may be insufficient, perhaps when it was originally platted, the requirement was different, then we do a 50-50 split. And as this property is now being proposed for subdivision, then there is the area of the right-of-way that's needed that would come out of this property. So that's just applying the rules as they stand today. What we're trying to do is to work with the property owner to allow the existing structure to be used to its fullest extent until such time as we need the right-of-way, by minimizing the amount that must be removed when the right-of-way is dedicated. Again, it allows for the greatest uses to remain on that property, minimizing the cost to the property owner. The reason we're supporting the variance is there's a benefit to the public. We typically wouldn't support a zero setback to a commercial street. However, the trade-off is we're getting right-of-way when that street should be improved in the future. And that still allows for the structure to remain to the largest degree possible to get as much use on that property, and the city then gets the right-of-way, which we don't have to purchase.
I just think this is going to be a future problem. I mean, they're going to promise to do all this stuff in the future if the street is developed.
Mr. Chair?
Yeah, Vicki.
So Fletcher referenced an agreement that the city is entering into with the property owner, and we've done this on other properties. I'll remind you of one over off of St. Patrick Street that's by that new dollar store on the south side of St. Pat, where we've had buildings that were built up to right-of-way lines years ago, and as we see development happening, we get the right-of-way when we need it, or if they ever should redevelop, then they dedicate it. So with this agreement, that will be a covenant on the property, so if they should sell it down the road, future owners are aware of it as well. It's something that the attorney's office has worked hard on securing with their attorneys to ensure that if we should need it, or if the building should ever be removed in this area, that the right-of-way get dedicated at that time.
Okay.
Karen?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think this is a reasonable request, and I think it will serve the public all right. So I'm going to make a motion to approve this variance, and part of the reason is I believe that the intent of the zoning ordinance will not be injurious to the neighborhood or detrimental to the public welfare.
Thank you. Karen, did your motion include the added stipulation that staff requested? Yes. Okay. And I apologize. Mike Kwasny seconded that motion. Thank you, Mike. Any further discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. I'd look for a motion to adjourn the Zoning Board of Adjustment then. Rachel made the motion. Mike seconded that motion. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. We'll now move over to the Planning Commission meeting for April 26, 2018, and welcome to that. Same requests, if you have an item on the Planning Commission agenda that you would like to speak to, please fill out a speaker request form and drop it off with the secretary. And if you also have a cell phone or electronic device, please turn it to silent or turn it off. The consent calendar today, items 1 through 8 have been placed on the consent calendar and may be approved as a group. Action will be taken on all consent items in accordance with staff's recommendation by a single vote. Any item may be removed from the consent calendar by any planning commissioner, staff member, or audience member for separate consideration at this time. The findings of this planning commission are recommendations to the city council. The city council will make the final decision. Are there any items 1 through 8 that staff would like removed? Are there any items 1 through 8 that the Planning Commission would like removed for separate consideration? And are there any items 1 through 8 that any audience member would like removed for separate consideration?
Move to approve 1 through 8 per staff recommendation.
Galen made the motion to approve items 1 through 8 per staff recommendations. Is there a second? Kurt seconded that motion. Any discussion on the motion? All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. We're up to item number 9.
Item number 9 is 18 PD 006. This was continued from the previous Planning Commission meeting. It's a major amendment to allow a 6-foot fence 4 feet from the property line in the second front yard. Give you a refresher, it's zone low-density residential district 2 in a planned development. It's got front yard is East Enchanted Pines Drive on the north, and then the second front yard is Topaz Lane on the south. This is the aerial showing other development in the area. There is a single-family dwelling on that property today. Future land use is low-density neighborhood. And give you an idea, East Enchanted Pines is a collector street, just east of 5th Street. The applicant has submitted a revised site plan identifying that they're proposing to remove the fence from that 4-foot line on that south side of the property as it abuts the adjacent property, moving it 18 feet in this direction and 14 feet in this direction. They did work with Public Works staff to identify what that site triangle would be in that area should a driveway be placed adjacent to that property line on that property to the south. It's a 10-foot by 10-foot area, and you can see they've shaded it out so that they're identifying it and they're keeping that fence out of that area. We did receive additional public comment, which was attached to this item, and a revised stipulation of approval. There is an open code violation on the property. In order to close that code violation, the property owner either needs to reduce that fence to 4 feet in height within that front yard setback, or obtain the exception through this planned development to allow the 6-foot height. And if they're proposing this, if you approve this site plan, then before that code violation could be closed out, they would have to move the fence as it's approved on this site plan. Staff's recommendation is to approve. It's the fence is being kept out of site triangles, which is the main issue we're looking at. It is unique that they have a front yard and a rear yard setback that abut a street. But are there any questions for staff at this time regarding?
Yeah, Karen.
Thank you. Fletcher, on that map that you see up there, you know, because of the way the road or the way the property comes into Topaz, it's got property right adjacent to Topaz, and then there's a little angle that on the, yeah, that on the bottom left there, that one that goes to the undeveloped property. Is the rear yard considered just the piece that's on the Topaz, or is it considered that other little, is that a side yard? That little piece that goes next to the undeveloped property? Am I making it?
It's just Topaz would be the rear yard. So it would have to, a fence would have to be, in order to be 6 feet in height, would have to be 10 feet off the property line. So you
Okay.
just find the property line and then 10 feet. So it would extend up that side lot line on the south and the north side where they couldn't have a 6-foot fence. So they are proposing to keep it out of that area on that south side, but keeping the 6-foot high, 4 feet off the property line for a portion of the property.
Right. And the side yard, then, they're allowed to have that 6-foot fence on each side, then?
Yes. So, or not that far north, but wherever the front property or the front of the house is, they could have 6 feet all the way to about 10 feet back right there.
Yeah, okay. Just as my comment, I've been on that street and seen that, and I understand that the fence on that little short piece that's side yard by the undeveloped property is connected, not connected, but it's the same size as the ones to their left on the screen. And I can understand that. I guess for me, they've got a 6-foot fence on both sides of the property so the neighbors can't see inside. And generally, I don't like to see where everybody's got nice front yards and then all of a sudden you've got a fence that's really tall right next to the street, kind of. I mean, pretty close to the street. And I know in the past we have done some of those and approved some of those based on the fact that, like, there's heavy traffic, like the one we did on Sheridan Lake Road, where, you know, I can understand that privacy request because there's cars whizzing by all the time. This is a little neighborhood area, and it just seems odd to see that big fence right there when there's none in the other people's front yards. And so I have doubts about the way it serves the community as a whole. I just think that that fence should either be shorter or move back a little bit. So that's my comments for now.
I don't have any other requests to speak up from the commission. Are there any questions, comments on this one? We went through it quite a bit the last round. And I also, I see see the applicant in the audience. Is there any request to speak from you on this? I don't have one. Okay. Okay. Justin, sorry.
Thanks. A quick question. Who is homeowner responsible for maintaining that section that's now behind his fence?
Are you talking about the area of the property between the fence and the street?
Correct.
Yes.
Okay.
You're required to maintain all the way to the street. The boulevard area is also the property owner's responsibility to maintain. That's the area between the sidewalk and the street.
Sure. Okay. Thanks.
With no other, Karen, coming back.
I guess I wasn't here the meeting that this was presented originally, but so I didn't hear all the comments from people on the dais. But I guess for me, I can understand that, you know, the applicant wants some privacy in the backyard because that is their backyard. But is there a compromise that we can look at or discuss up here that would solve that same problem, but still give them some privacy? I guess I'm looking for comments from other people so I know what other folks are thinking. It just seems to me that even if they moved it back a couple more feet, that would help. Anything would help. They've got that privacy, like I said, on both sides. It's just the people that happen to be driving by. And So I'm looking for some other comments other than, I mean, at the, where it is right today, I just don't think I can support exactly what's there, so.
Galen?
Thank you. So I think from last meeting, the biggest issue from, at least from my perspective, and I think from a lot of us, was the site triangle was number one, and it seems like they've complied with that. They met with city staff to work out a resolution, so I guess I am of the feeling that the compromise has already been worked out, and I think this is a pretty good plan, so I would support this plan.
Rachel?
Yeah, this question is mostly for Fletcher. Would you be able to bring up just kind of the layout of their yard and maybe just sort of like roughly sketch the fence that we're looking at as it's presented in this? Because if I understand, they already have kind of a section on the other side that is taking care of the site triangle on that side. So it seems like we have kind of this oddly shaped fence now where it's kind of going, yeah, over there and then up. I don't know.
That's not exact. There's a light on that corner.
Oh, yeah, that's right. It was the light.
So here you can see kind of where they've jogged it. In this corner, there's a light and a little, looks like a utility. So that may be 10 feet back at that portion, but we did confirm it's out of the site triangle.
Mm-hmm.
And then this is the area where they're proposing to move it back and back in that direction to clear that site triangle for any potential building on the site to the south of them.
So on the leg that's kind of like parallel to the street, that's 17 feet and the other way is 14, or do I have that backwards?
It's 18 feet along Topaz and then 14 feet back from.
Okay, I would think that that would create some issues with just simply maintenance. Like, that's just kind of a weird fence to have. I don't know. I'm still, kind of against granting this exception. I just don't think that it's appropriate to kind of build. And I don't really care what the contractor says because, that seems to be an issue that unfortunately you guys are having. But, we did hear from neighbors as well that they weren't exactly happy about this fence. So honestly, my vote is going to be no unless we find some sort of other compromise that not only deals with the site triangle, which is an absolute must, but also deals with the concerns of the neighbors.
Please. You've got to come up here and identify yourself, just so we have our records straight.
Scott Scherber, I'm the homeowner. The neighbor that had written the letter that has the problem with the fence, I don't know that there's anything we can do to pacify him because he's mainly upset that the fence runs along his driveway. And I don't, I think we're within code on that. So I don't know that moving the fence the entire setback of 10 feet does anything to pacify him. Obviously, we want to have happy neighbors, but I don't know, just speaking directly to Rachel's comment, I don't know that there's anything that we can do to satisfy his request. He seems to be upset that our house is built the way it was, just which directions it's facing in general. So that was all.
Thank you. Further comments from the commission? Justin?
Thanks. I guess I would agree with Galen a little bit. I do think that it's an unfortunate situation, and not knowing all the history and the back and forth, again, it can't really kind of, there's more going on than just this with the situation with the contractor, so I'm not going to take that for a lot. But I think that for me, something had to happen from last time, and I think they have, and so I think there's a show of good faith to try to make something work. I don't know that this is the perfect scenario, but I also don't know that, in my opinion, that going back for what may have been an honest mistake to make him change the whole thing is that. So I think there's a compromise for the site triangle. 18 feet and 14 feet seem to be a fair amount to create that for the next homeowner. So in my opinion, where I'm at, I think, is not knowing what more can be done, unless there's some other great ideas, which there may be. I'm probably going to be in favor of this as well, so.
Thanks, Jesselyn. Karen?
Thanks again. I looked up the criteria for review on something like this, where you look at what can you do, you know, other than having it 10 feet back. And I know that there's some things that you have to look at, like adverse impacts have been reasonably mitigated, those kinds of things. And I know that staff has looked at that and determined that this is the best that can be done. I just think I still think that there's other things that can be done, because we don't want to cause any undue hardship to the public, and I'm not that it's undue hardship, but it is an impact on the neighborhood. The neighbors have to see that fence all the time. The guy, unfortunately, with the driveway, I mean, if I had a 6-foot fence along my driveway, even though there's that part where they can back out and finally see what's coming, I just think it ruins the homeowners adjacent to that, and I think that's not fair to them, I guess. And so even looking at the criteria, there's things that pertain, but there's things that don't. So it's kind of a 50-50 thing, I think, for a lot of people. But my vote is, unless we can move it back or down somehow, my vote is still going to be no. So.
Thanks, Karen. Mike Gallagher?
Yeah, from my point of view, I guess when you've got a fence line there and all of a sudden you're taking these cutouts, one for the light, and now you're putting another cutout basically for this access for his motorhome over there. It just seems to me like that's going to be a terrible looking fence across there. It's kind of be an aesthetic thing as well. And, you know, going back to the disputes between the homeowner and the builder, you know, whenever you get into a position like that, nobody's a winner. And in my position, or I guess in my experience, at that point you go back to the rules as they're written and apply them that way. And that way it's fair to everybody. So it's my inclination to vote no on this.
Mike Kwasny?
Can you show again, Fletcher, what exactly they're putting the fence, how that will look?
So on this new proposed fence, we'd be moving it back 14 feet, 18 feet along Topaz, putting an angle into where it connects back into the existing fence.
And how many feet do we have total on that fence? I guess would it be, a proposal might be to go all the way along there instead of taking that cutout and go the full length. Would make it, to Mike's point, it would make it a little more aesthetically appealing. And I know it's expense to go the full length, but that might be a solution that would take care of some of that if he wants a 6-foot fence. The other option is then to go 4-foot all the way across the existing fence that he's replacing. So either way, it's an expense. So I think I'm in Mike's camp that it's not going to give a good appealing look to the neighborhood, and that's what we're kind of after too.
Thanks, Mike. Galen?
Maybe a question for the applicant and for Fletcher as well is, do we look at the options for using a 4-foot fence? What's the setback requirement for a 4-foot fence, and was that ever considered as an alternative here?
4-foot fence would be allowed on the property line, so they could have it all the way to the property line, all the way around, 4 foot high, actually all the way up here surrounding the entire property.
They wouldn't need any exception or anything, that's just, wouldn't need.
No, and then to the point of continuing the line here, if that's 14 feet back, then the minimum they need back is 10
We wouldn't need to talk to us either.
for a
about
6-foot
that.
high fence.
Okay, that's all.
Kurt?
Fletcher just answered question that I had regarding how far it had to be back and 10 feet. You know, this is a unique lot having two front yards, so to speak, and it's unfortunate that it was platted that way. I don't know, you know, looking at the plat and how they could have done it differently when they originally platted it, but I think they're between a rock and a hard place, and it just seems like there's not much we could do except reduce it to a 4-foot high. I am kind of leaning towards, you know, either moving it back into the 10-foot or cutting it down to a 4-foot high at the front, because it definitely looks strange. It infringes on the other neighbor's front yard, and the look of it just it's strange looking, and I'm leaning towards a no vote also.
Mr. Chair?
Yeah, Vicki?
Just a reminder that if it's the desire of the Planning Commission that the fence be moved back 10 feet or more, or reduced to 4 feet, then all you would need to do is deny the request, and then the property owner could choose, because either one of those would be in compliance, and he would have either option.
Thanks, Vicki. Galen, you have,
So I'm going to make a motion to approve this per staff recommendations, just because that's what we talked about last meeting, and that's what we asked the applicant to do. I kind of being swayed a little bit after thinking about how it looks, but I think I want to make the motion that we approve this just because that's what we asked the applicant to do, and just see where that goes.
okay, Galen made the motion to approve per staff recommendations. Is there a second to that motion? Justin seconded that motion. And then I have some additional speaker requests, so we'll call it discussion on the motion. Justin?
Thanks. I guess a comment I'll make, thinking about this too, and trying to find a compromise. I think that, I don't think it's fair to just make somebody who I believe may have made an honest mistake, but there's this conversation about the neighbors and what do they think and how do they feel. And the side yard neighbor in the back, his complaint wasn't the back of the fence, it was the side of the fence. And then the next neighbor's gonna have the same complaint because he's gonna have a backyard fence in his side yard. I understand the setbacks and what that does, but I'm afraid moving it 10 feet back. So the two options are move it 10 feet back and have a 6-foot fence. Well, you're still gonna have the side yard fences, and you're still going to have a 6-foot fence along towpaths. Yes, it's set back a little bit more, I get that, but it's still there. Then there's a maintenance issue between there, and yes, that's the homeowner's responsibility, but it's still kind of out of sight, out of mind a little bit, and not saying that he won't maintain it, but saying there's gonna be that issue there. If you leave it on the property line at 4 feet, there's still a fence there. So yes, it's not 6 feet, and the site triangle, which we've resolved, I believe, is a lot better, but there's still a fence. So the perception or the thought process of the fence being this eyesore, this burden for people on towpaths, in some respects still exists if it sits on their property line, I guess. So I don't know. Yes, yes, I see the difference, so I'm not saying there's not, but is there that big of a benefit to either of those two options? There is a benefit, but I'm trying to balance that compared to what we've seen as a proposal to cut the corner of site triangle and what's fair and what's reasonable. So that's kind of where I'm at, I guess, for everybody's edification, if you will, but trying to be reasonable with it, so thanks.
Thank you, Justin. John?
With showing the street light? Okay, so that, is that fence existing behind there, or is that jogged around there right now?
It's jogged around the light. So
Yeah.
it's keeping that little utility box and the light so that there's access to it.
How far back is that jog?
Not exactly sure. I believe it's probably around 10 feet.
A 10-foot jog, or how far from the property line?
Do you mean, hold on.
It did, to me, it just looks weird. I drove by there. I said, why, that line seems like it would be a good line if it complies to follow all the way behind the lamp post. Because this thing is all, I don't know what the word is. Not good.
Well, we have this picture up, just so we, for my clarification, if that jog is 10 foot off the property line, essentially starting there, they could leave the 6-foot fence along the side and the back, or whatever you want to call that. But as it goes towards the sidewalk, they would need to transition down to a 4-foot if they were going to leave the current location of the fence.
Correct. So
Okay.
without the plan development consideration of letting the 10-foot fence, or 6-foot high fence be within that 10-foot distance, or if it's the decision of the planning commission that leave it in its location, but let's lower it, then again, the correct decision of the planning commission should just be to deny the request, and the property owner gets to pick. Because then, or he could withdraw the application sitting here, and then he's back to just doing it according to the options that are available in the code. Mr. Chair, I do have a question for Carla and Ted.
Please.
So we talk about a 6-foot fence being allowed if it sets 10 foot back from the lot line. But in reviewing the site triangle concerns with the property owner that Fletcher references to the south, to me it's to the west, but it had to set back 14 feet. My question that I need confirmation on is, even a 4-foot fence could not be located in a site triangle. Is that correct? Okay. So just so the property owner is aware that at that southwest corner of his property, regardless of the design of the fence he chooses, he still needs to design it where it's not encroaching in that site triangle. So you're still going to have the jog at that location.
All right. Karen, you're up next.
I looked at the adjacent property that has a fence also around their yard, and they do have a 4-foot fence, and then they go to a 6-foot fence, which is truly their backyard, and they can do that because they only have one. They're only facing one street, not two. But you don't think that a fence that's 6 foot high is much different than a 4-foot high fence, but there is a visual difference when you drive by, and a 4-foot fence is normal, more normal, I guess. A 6-foot fence really does seem like a barrier, and you're putting a barrier to that home behind a wall, and for the traveling public, it seems like you're putting a house behind a wall, and it's aesthetically not pleasing, but more than that, it disrupts your sense of what a community is. If you put everybody behind a wall, that's just not something that we as citizens seem to like. And for me, I would lower the fence right there, just chop off the top and leave the fence there, but just make it shorter to a 4-foot fence. That's what I would do if I was the homeowner. Gives you some privacy, but not maybe that big wall. And they still have the ability to have, like I said, the neighbors will still have that 6-foot fence on either side, that's legal. So I'm looking at the legality as well as what's best for the neighborhood. I don't care if somebody made a mistake. I don't care if the property owner and the developers that made or built the building are in cahoots or trying to, get angry at each other. I'm just looking at what is best for the community, and I just don't think that leaving this fence the way it is in the best interest of the community. So that's my comments. And I could make a substitute motion, but I think I can't do it when I talk. I don't know, after I talk.
Well, I would say we have a motion on the floor to approve per staff recommendations with the stipulations as listed. If there's not any more discussion on that, I think we'll take a vote on that motion and see what happens. Any further discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? No. So I have aye from Galen and Justin. Any others that I missed? So that motion fails. Okay. Karen made the motion to deny the major amendment to the plan development. John seconded that motion. And further discussion or any discussion on this motion? Seeing none, all those in favor of the motion to deny, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? I've got Justin down as a no. Did I miss anybody? That motion carries with Justin saying no.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Just for clarification for the property owner, that means that your options are that you can lower the fence down to 4 feet and leave it in its current location with the exception of the site triangle, or move it back 10 feet, taking into consideration that you would need to move it back as shown on this site plan to provide the site triangle at that southwest corner. But that's your option. I'm sorry, you'll need to go through the chair to ask questions.
Please, could you use the mic again?
If we move the fence back to the entire section back 10 feet, are we okay on the site triangle?
No, looking at what needed to,
Because we went past the recommended.
my apologies, as long as you're outside of the site triangle, and if that's the 10-foot mark, then yes, 10 feet would work.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Since we're covering it all, is there an option for them to appeal to council if they,
Certainly.
okay. So that 7 days has to be,
We would have to receive that request to appeal your decision to council by the end of the workday, a week from today.
Maybe I should just stay up here. How long do we have to move the fence back to 10 feet to not be in further violation?
Mr. Chair, this is a code enforcement issue, so we'll visit with the attorney's office to see the length of time to get that done.
yeah, I don't think we can provide you that timetable,
Okay.
unfortunately.
Okay, thank you.
All right, item number 10.
Item number 10 is 18 PD 013, a major amendment to a plan development to expand an auto body repair shop. Property is located at 350 North La Crosse Street, is the location of Abra Auto Body. Unique property in that it's bounded on all sides by streets to north, south, east, and west. Property is zoned general commercial district with a planned development. We've got medium-density residential to the west and south, office commercial to the east, and looks like industrial to the north. Here we have an aerial of the property as it is and adjacent uses. We have single-family to the west. Looks like some trailer or mobile home parks to the south, as well as a drainage area. Warehouse to the north, and then a new medical building to the east. Future land use is mixed-use commercial, and North Lacrosse Street is identified as a revitalization corridor, as well as a principal arterial street on the city's major street plan. The applicant is proposing a two-story, 9,890 square foot addition on the east side of the property, which will include more bays for auto repair. And then they're also proposing to expand the parking lot on the south side of the property. The applicant is requesting 4 exceptions. The first exception is to allow 40% of the landscaping to be located in the right-of-way in lieu of the maximum allowed 25%. What that means is that the number of points in the calculation which are located on the property, they can only usually count 25% of the landscaping in there towards their minimum required points. So they're requesting that 40% be located in the right-of-way. Because of the location of the property and how it abuts all these streets, providing that additional landscaping along the street frontages, trees in this area, and along the north, and these areas, it provides sort of that landscape buffer from adjacent properties. One of the stipulations of approval is that prior to submittal of a building permit, they coordinate with the city's urban forester to ensure that the species which are chosen and put in those areas in the right-of-way do not cause injury to the right-of-way or the sidewalks, etc. The second exception is to waive the requirement to provide 1 landscape parking island. For every 50 parking spaces in the parking lot, they would be required to have 1 landscaped parking island. They are 1 parking space over the minimum required for the use. Staff is recommending that that exception be denied in order to break up some of that concrete asphalt area. We do recommend that there be some landscaping in that parking lot to provide some shade and break up that hardscape. The third exception is to allow a retaining wall over 4 feet in height in the front yard setback. In order to get the parking on this south side, they need to build a retaining wall which will be up to 6 feet in height. There is sort of a elevation change in this area. In addition, they'll be putting a 4-foot-high chain link fence along that property line in order to close in that parking lot. But the retaining wall height is needed to get that parking in there. It doesn't interfere with any site triangles. There are no approaches in this location. And there is kind of, as I said, an elevation change where it will just be holding back that hillside there for the parking. And then the fourth exception is to allow a fence height of 6 feet along the property line in lieu of the maximum allowed fence height of 4 feet. Now, there is an existing 6-foot-high fence along this property line, which is where they're proposing to take out the fence in this area as part of the construction, but they'll be rebuilding it, and I have some pictures of that, which it is an existing fence. They're just looking for permission to continue to have that fence in the area that it is. Elevations of the proposed expansion. That second floor is some offices or employee rooms and storage, and the first floor would be more bays for auto repair. And then this shows fence as proposed with an additional foot of anti-climb on top of the fence. Again, with the retaining wall and the fence. Here we have looking into the property from North Lacrosse Street, looking to the east. Sign is posted on the property. This is that area on the south side where the retaining wall is proposed and the additional parking. And then the last plan development we looked at for this property was to allow the cellular communication tower. And here you see the existing fence That's along this street frontage. This is property to the south, undeveloped and used for drainage, and then looking north along La Crosse Street and to the south. One of the stipulations of approval and what the applicant is proposing is to jog this fence at the corner to keep it out of any site triangle issues on the property at this intersection and keep that intersection clear. But there you can see the existing fence and anti-climb wire. And then the existing fence on that east side of the property, wood fence with the barbed wire on top. And at the north corner, this is the jog that was previously required in a planned development, I believe back in a couple planned developments ago. So they did provide it on this northeast corner, but they're also now proposing to provide it on that southeast corner. But this is the fence. It's existing. It was previously approved. They just don't have the exception for the height. And this is looking at the property to the north. As I went through the exception request, we are recommending approval of all except the one landscape parking island. We do believe that would be needed in that parking lot. So with that, staff's recommendation is to approve with stipulations. The applicant isn't, or the applicant's consultant is in the audience if there are any questions.
Thanks, Fletcher. Karen?
Thank you. Fletcher, I just have a question about the barbed wire on the top. Was that approved through the plan developments of previous plan developments? Or, I mean, is that allowed through general commercial, or is?
It is.
It is.
As long as it's 6 feet above ground level.
Okay, it's allowed in general commercial district. I just couldn't remember how that came about. I think this is a reasonable request. I don't see any issue that I have with it. I think expanding that, and they've been pretty good neighbors up there, I think, to start with. I agree that we need to have something to break the parking lot, having that landscape island. I think that's important because it is kind of a big open asphalt parking lot, so I think that's a good thing. But I don't see any issues with what they're doing, so thank you.
Thanks, Karen. Kurt?
So if they put in the island in the parking lot, there'll be obviously some landscape points that would be associated with that. So would that reduce the number that are going to be required for the right-of-way down less than 40% then?
It would, but it'd be minimal. We'd have to calculate it. But their request is, as part of requesting the exception, to have that 40% in the right-of-way. So, I mean, even if it was just a tree.
Okay. And Jerry, maybe you can answer this. Where would that island go if we're required to put it in?
You gotta use Jerry. You know better. Got it.
Jerry Foster with FMG Engineering. I don't know, we'll have a meeting with the owner and pick a strategic location for it. We have to work around how his vehicles work and this and that, but he has no objection to adding an island in the parking lot.
Okay.
And we'll work with the staff on the location, Kurt. So.
All right, thank you.
Since you're up there, could I ask you a couple questions? It looks like we're getting a up-to-code stormwater drainage for the parking lot. There appeared to be a new metering basin in the south. Is that correct?
To the south, there's a large regional city-owned stormwater
on
pond.
the property, it looks like there was a a little
No, those
catch
are all
area?
landscape areas with different rock areas and different styles of landscaping.
Okay.
We're doing the stormwater quality treatment with some inlet devices, but the stormwater detention runs into an existing regional detention pond, and we did the analysis, and I believe staff concurred that we did not need to have on-site detention, but we do
Okay.
have treatment.
Okay. And this is a bad day to have fences or walls, but that 6-foot wall, it looks like there's trees between that and the sidewalk. About how far off the sidewalk is that wall? Do you know?
I would estimate, looking at the width of the sidewalk, that wall is probably back on the order of 10 feet from the edge of the sidewalk. So it sets back a substantial distance. And I would note all the right-of-ways on the north side of the property, the south side of the property, and the east side of the property are wider than normal for this type of land use and street patterns. We discussed with city staff on vacating the excess right-of-way, and staff was not very receptive to that, so we did not pursue that right-of-way. And that's one of the reasons why we think it's reasonable to put some of the landscaping in the right-of-way, because there's more right-of-way out there than in theory the city needs. So.
Thank you. Anyone else have a question for Jerry? John?
So they have one extra parking space right now in the design?
Yes.
So how many parking spaces is that island going to take up?
One.
One?
Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
Other questions, comments on this item? I've got one more, and it's mostly, I think, for staff. The stipulations say that allowing the fence on the property lines would be granted. So even though those fences are well back from the street/sidewalk, that's the property line that they're on currently? Okay. Different property from the last one.
On the north, this area of the fence, well, not there, but this is existing on the property line.
Thank you. Kurt made the motion to approve per staff recommendations. Is there a second? Second. Mike Kwasny. Any further discussion? All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Item number 11.
Mr. Chair,
Yeah.
we are requesting that item number 11 be continued to your July 5th Planning Commission meeting. We are going to be bringing this topic to our Coffee with Planners meeting next Wednesday at 9 o'clock in this room. We hope several of you can attend, and we would like to just take as much public comment as we can and have sufficient time after that to do any amendments to our proposal, and then bring it forward for discussion at this meeting on July 5th.
All right, sounds good. So July 5th, is there a motion to continue? Karen made the motion to continue till July 5th. Galen seconded that motion. Any discussion? All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Item number 12.
This is an ordinance to adopt some provisions related to mobile food vendors in the zoning code. Currently, we don't really have any regulations about food trucks in the zoning code, and we have received regular questions from food trucks. As you know, they are operating in Rapid City, so we thought we should update Title 17 with some regulations. It's really a minimal ordinance to make sure that they're not blocking the sidewalks or the streets, to make sure that they are providing ADA access, to clarify the uses or the parcels where they can operate. Basically, the ordinance would allow them on commercial and industrial parcels with the property owner's consent, as well as in the city's parks. We do have a regulation in Title 12 of the code related to vending in parks that was passed a year ago or so, and that's working well. We decided not to have any sort of license or permit requirements from the city. These are already inspected by the State Department of Health. So we thought staff thought it was duplicative to try to license or permit them. Instead, what we tried to do was look at what other cities have done, put some parameters on these food vendors, and allow them to operate basically how they have been operating in the past.
Thank you, Carla. Any questions on this one? Mike Kwasny.
I guess the only one that I had a little question on was the conjunction with special events permitted by the city, allowing them the sidewalks. Is that going to be pretty hard to determine, or is the events that are in place already established that they can do along sidewalks?
Well, to have a special event in the street or on the sidewalks, I don't know that these really go on the sidewalks, but usually that's in the street. There's a process through the Parks Department and the Police Department to get a special event permit. A lot of those special events, like summer nights or ones at Main Street Square that block off the street, do have food trucks. So we wanted to make sure that we're not excluding food trucks from those sorts of special events when the special event wants them to be a participant. We also had a provision in there where if there's a special event held in the Central Business District, we were thinking of summer nights, I think. If they wanted to be within 300 feet of that, they do need to get the special events permission. So there's kind of to protect the integrity of the special event downtown, that there aren't food trucks that are in a private parking lot that are trying to draw things away from the event. So we were trying to protect like I said, protect the special event and their ability to not have their people poached away by some food trucks. If they want food trucks there, that's fine. That's totally fine.
Gotcha, okay. I think it looks like it's a good control a little bit, so I'm for it, I guess, so.
Any other questions or comments? If not, I'd look for a motion, I guess. Mike Gallagher made the motion to approve the ordinance amendment as presented. Is there a second? Rachel seconded the motion. Any discussion? All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Discussion items. I know we have a staff item.
I'll just remind you one more time that each of you are invited to join us next Wednesday in this room at 9 o'clock for our Coffee with Planners, and I think it's really beneficial if some of you can attend. Then when that item comes forward on the ADUs, it will give you some background information. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Vicki. Then John.
Are we still pursuing the urban wildfire district restrictions that was proposed how long ago?
Mr. Chair?
Yeah.
Good morning. Actually, no, those provisions are being used as a best practice at this point, and so we haven't pursued it as far as initiating it as an ordinance or other specific requirement at this point, but we do use the document as a best practice. So when a project comes in, we use that as a reference component. When the future adoption of the newer edition of the International Fire Code will likely bring more provisions of that or more stringent application of it. But at this point, that's the status.
The reason I'm bringing it up, one of my neighbors is adding a attached garage to his house, and the existing house has 45-year-old wood shakes on it. Well, he's proposing to put wood shakes on the new garage part. Our covenants don't allow it, but some people don't really care about covenants. So I asked Kurt if that ordinance, because I had assumed that it had gone through, but evidently City Council turned it down when it was proposed.
It actually never made it that far.
Oh.
Had significant opposition up to that point, so it was withdrawn and held as an advisory document. The cedar shake roof provisions are a strong provision within that, but we don't have any ability to restrict that at this point. There is, however, a recent grant awarding that some folks have been able to take advantage of that are a shake roof replacement program that targets those in those high hazard areas.
That's been funded now?
Yes.
Right, yeah,
Yep.
okay. All right, thanks.
Thank you.
Carla, do you want to talk about the amendments of our rules?
Yes. We're proposing an amendment to the Planning Commission section of the code, which is in Title II, which, because it's not in Title 17 or 16, it doesn't need to go through you, or the process doesn't have you approving it, but I wanted to let you know. The copy of the ordinance is attached to the agenda, and there's really one major change that I wanted to make you aware of. Currently in the Planning Commission section, it says that it requires ward membership on the Planning Commission, where there's at least one member from each ward. The mayor's office has had a very difficult time getting membership, getting even applicants from some wards. And so, to the point where there's a current vacancy on the Planning Commission and has been for several months, but it's been unable to be filled because I think Ward 2 doesn't have, nobody up here is from Ward 2. And so at the mayor's office direction, we kind of softened the language in the ordinance that wouldn't require ward membership. Currently, it says that if there's a ward that isn't represented on the Planning Commission, then you can't make an appointment from a different ward. So basically, it requires at least one member from each ward. The language has been softened to say that in appointing members, to say that it's a goal of or an objective to have at least one member from each ward, but to say that in appointing members, due regard will be given to ward representation. So it just takes away that requirement and lists it as a preference. That due regard language is similar to ones that we have elsewhere in the code. So that's the major change. And then while we were looking at Title 260, or Chapter 260, we noticed a lot of things that we wanted to take out because they were based on state law, and some based on state law that had been repealed. And so while the rest of it looks like we made a lot of other changes, we really didn't make any changes to how things are actually occurring, other than that ward representation piece that was the initial reason to look at the chapter anyway.
Karen?
Thank you. I think I've spoken a lot up here already today, but I just wanted to make a comment about that requirement for one person from every ward. Previously, we didn't have that in there, and along the way, 20 years ago or whenever it was, that a council came up and said, no, we want to make sure we're represented, and so they made it, a law that it had to be that way. That's the right terminology. And over the years, it is difficult to get people, especially a part of the city where there's a lot of working class people who can't take the time out to come to a meeting, and and I think it got unbalanced, before because there were so many people from one or two wards. But I think this is a good way to make that still not a requirement, but something that would be of benefit if you could. And as long as people try to keep people from every ward, I think that's the best you can do. So I'm glad you're changing that, and I think this ordinance will help a lot.
Any other questions or comments for Carla on this item? Any other items? Look for a motion to adjourn. Oh, Ted, sorry.
Thank you. I'd like to take this opportunity to introduce Todd Pakash as a new member to the Planning Commission scene, I guess. Todd's been promoted to be the Development Review Group Coordinator. He will be attending these meetings. Todd's been with the city, the engineering group, for several years. He was the street engineer, basically. For the design group, he's now been promoted to lead the Development Review Group. So Todd will be attending the meetings. He will be basically taking my place. And I'd like to just give them a moment to welcome him and ask him any questions, or be sure to make him earn his keep.
Well, thanks. Welcome, Todd. And Ted, does this mean if we want to bug you, we have to go find you over in your office or other places?
Yes.
Oh, man. Lucky guy. Oh, sure.
I still plan on attending most of these meetings, as schedule and timing allows.
Sure. Well, thank you, and welcome again, Todd.
Thank you.
I think I'd look for a motion to adjourn then. Anyone? Karen made the motion, and Kurt seconded that motion. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye.